first episode of the High on God podcast here. This is Zachary Paul Pratt. I am Matthew Raymond Spinks, as most of you know. But this week we just want to get into a little bit of our story, just to get to know you, and you can get to know us, and share a little bit of just kind of why we even want to do something like this, our heart behind it. And we're excited over the next however long this podcast goes to just get whacked together, to experience the glory, to dive into some topics that you may not hear talked about anywhere else, to explore heavenly realities, the glory realities, but also in a down-to-earth way, and talk about our own lives and just how you can really live just whacked, live in heaven on earth bliss, and yet still, do normal things, have a family, work a job, whatever interactions you may have in daily life. So we're excited to get into that. I'm gonna let Zach start, and kind of the question and the topic that we have for today is just kind of our own history in God. And so Zach, I guess this week, just love to ask you, what is your history with the drunken glory, with the bliss, with the gospel? What kind of stories do you want to share with the people, help them to get to know you? And what's been your experience in the bliss of Jesus, man?
Hey. Such a fun question to start off with. I grew up like a lot of Christians. I had two parents that raised me going to church every Sunday, and we would go to church as a family, and even during the week, my parents would have us do prayers at night before bed. We would memorize scripture. These are some of the things that when I think back on my childhood, that I'm very grateful for. On the other hand, there was a dynamic that was a little bit different than maybe how I see the Lord now growing up, in the sense that I didn't have a full awareness at that time or at that age of the level of a personal relationship, even, or certainly of the gospel, good news that I've come to know now. But there was definitely this precious and pure approach to knowing God through what He's said in Scripture, and on Sundays, Sunday mornings, a community or a family understanding through going to church and having a lot of friends that were from the church. So that was pretty much growing up all the way. We went to the same church from when I was young, from when I was actually baptized as an infant at that church, all the way up to when I was about 12. At that time, my dad decided to go to seminary and become a pastor. And seminary is what the people in that part of the church, that denomination, do when they want to transition to becoming a pastor. Sort of like a special secondary education for pastors. And so at that time, we all moved to a different state and uprooted everything. And at that time, I sort of transitioned to almost an even more religious approach to worship and to God. And even that, though, was via the community that I had seen or become a part of. A lot of my friends were kids of pastors or kids of pastors to be. I went to summer camp for a few years in a row for kids who want to become pastors. So I was deep into the theology of the church at large, but then specifically of that denomination for quite a while.
You grew up as a pretty good boy.
Yeah. I had that kind of a childhood. So I think at some point during college I started to almost become more agnostic, because the deeper I got into a ritualistic approach to God, the more of a distant, far off God formed in my mind. I think I eventually got to this place where God was just sort of, maybe he existed, maybe he didn't. I didn't have a whole lot of personal interactions at all whatsoever. He had become such an idea in my head that I just sort of decided that, it wasn't that important or significant. But I think that a combination of my upbringing, as well as just the desire on my heart, and that I believe is on everybody's hearts, to experience God, was still there. So when I found out about this small home group that was meeting, I had just moved back into town from going to school, going to college out of town, and having a kind of a hard time of it there. And so I think I was looking for a way to reconnect spiritually in some way. I found out about a small group of people that were meeting in their homes. They sounded passionate, and I knew they were Christian, and some of them were former members of, the same sort of church and upbringing that I was. So I found out about where the meeting was, and I showed up, and then that was basically the first day that I met Matt. And from there, it became an ever-building and ever-increasing journey of knowing God through experience, in addition to a theological approach. So the pendulum swung to the experience side for quite a while, more heavily, and I was beginning to experience, his presence more. I was beginning to have encounter, getting drunk in the Spirit, experiencing like ecstasies and trances and things like that. And the types of experiences that I had were things that I couldn't deny. They were things that weren't just a part of a group atmosphere, but they were things that I had for myself that I would carry, and that would carry me later on through different experiences that would happen, that would come against or make me question certain things later on down the road. But ever since that time, it's just been a ever building and increasing awareness of a communal God, a childlike God, a God that is in complete oneness and union with us. Learning things layer by layer, encountering his joy, and knowing that it was something that was meant to be tasted and experienced all the time. Just knowing deep down inside my heart that what I was experiencing was something that I wanted to experience every single moment. And starting to see scripture and starting to see what I had learned about God in my theological studies through the lens of the joy and the drunken, whacked experience that I was having with God personally, and communally. So a God of community, a God of joy, a God of encounter, a God of oneness. So I would say that I've gone through different phases since then, even, because that was about 10 years ago. More than that now, maybe 11. But overall, it's just been a clear journey for me of knowing God in a more and more grace encounter, seeing how he takes me through different phases of life and different things that I've gone through, marriage and children, significant life events, and seeing how he's been there at one with me to help me to perceive the oneness through those different experiences, and perceive his grace through those experiences. experiencing my friends being there for me in community, and the deep, rich experience that is grace, gospel, drunken community, because the depth of relationship that's formed there through encounter and through awareness and revelation that God brings is unlike anything that can be experienced anywhere else. So it's been great to have friends like Matt who have been through just about everything with me, and been there for me through anything and everything, the goods and the bads and the highs and the lows. So I think most recently I've been encountering God through encountering God as a God of relationship. So a God of community. And I know I said that, but really, like, most recently, it's like I'm experiencing him as a God of grace, as shown through friends, as shown through family, as shown through myself, towards other people. And the trials that come through family, the trials that come through relationship, seeing his goodness and his grace in those circumstances, seeing the experience that is Jesus Christ, the experience that is his presence, in those situations. So
It's awesome.
yeah,
It's
that's
awesome.
that's sort of a chronological ish.
I love it.
way
I
of
love
saying
what
it.
you were touching on too. How it's, we've been experiencing the bliss of the gospel for some years, and there are highs and lows, and though, I mean, in the midst of that, our anchor is in, his joy and in his goodness. But it's not that we don't experience all the circumstances of life or the different challenges of life, and yet here we are still doing the High on God podcast, and that's actually a subject I really want to explore in some of these future podcasts too, is what about normal life, what about challenges, what about all that stuff, and because the whack is no shallow drink, Jesus is no shallow drink. So I love, and I've seen that in Zach's life as well, so it's awesome. Just as a way of introduction, maybe you can share what's one story from that really stands out to you when you first began to experience the high, or what's one story even that just stands out in your mind that maybe when you first knew like the bliss was real, or some of your early experiences.
There's a couple, but I think one of my favorites was it was during the time when Matt and Katie were at still leaders in the International House of Prayer in town, and we were having a prayer meeting at their house, and a lot of people were over. A couple people from the community were there, and I had been to different types of worship services in the past, or prayer meetings. I had experienced different things growing up in that regard. I had experienced, the traditional liturgy. I had experienced the traditional liturgy with organ, with modern music. I had experienced even more charismatic things where people were speaking in tongues, prophesying, raising their hands, all this other stuff, all within the same church. But and so that was sort of the breadth of my experience up to that point. But I had been to a few meetings of Hillside, and I had met everybody already.
Which is the name of our home
Which is the name of our home community,
yeah,
Hillside.
for those that don't know.
Yeah, and so they were having a prayer meeting, and I had already been to a few meetings, and we had worshiped together, and I had experienced a lot of joy and a lot of God again for the first time in a long time. But one thing that I hadn't experienced was happened during this particular meeting. We were praying, and it was almost a very silent atmosphere where we were just having sort of a contemplative moment. And one of my friends now just started laughing, And at first I looked up and I looked around and I thought something funny had happened. I thought something funny had happened sort of in the natural, where, somebody had made a joke or someone was doing something silly that I wasn't aware of. But after about 20 seconds, I realized that they were just laughing because of the joy of the Lord. Like, they were laughing because they were having an experience with God that caused them to laugh. And that was the first time I had experienced that. And there was something about that just rewired my brain. It short-circuited my brain, and then it rewired my brain, because I had never been around someone being so emotionally affected by God that they were laughing before. Of course, now it's just a part of normal life, but then it was something that really changed the way I see God. It brought up so many questions. It was like, why first it was, why would someone laugh when we're having a serious prayer time?
Yeah.
And then it was, why don't people laugh when they're feeling the joy of the Lord? So yeah, that was definitely one of the
Awesome.
experiences I had early on that messed with me.
That's so good. Well, I'll just use that as a transition point for mine, because I remember some of those early stories, very similar things were happening in my brain as well. And then I'll kind of share a little bit of my story with, how I became, someone who's a minister of the bliss, a minister of being high on Jesus. So I'll kind of go into my story. So thanks for sharing yours.
Yeah.
It's really cool. And I look forward to, in these podcasts, just, sharing real life stuff that's going on, and in our own story with people, that we can see a new normal. I believe that some of the stuff that we're experiencing is it's kind of rare right now, but it's like you said, the transition that happens in your brain. At first you're like, why are people laughing during prayer? And then after a while you're like, why aren't people all laughing during their prayer times? How life changes. And so some of my earliest experiences were like that as well. It's funny, only recently, I don't know if I even included this in the book, because recently I just remembered a time when I went over to visit some friends in the Netherlands, and we went to this worship conference. It was like this cool worship conference on like in a beach area. People were camping out, and then there were these huge tents where people were worshiping. And I just remember during the worship, they were just the band actually quit playing, and people were just singing a cappella for a while. And it was that old worship chorus, "Glory, glory, send your glory." That was I think it was from Delirious back in the day. A lot of worship leaders were singing it and whatever. So anyway, the band drops out, and it's just the voices, and then even the voices drop out, and then it's just kind of quiet. But there's just at the time I was a little bit inexperienced with a lot of that stuff, even though I'd been in the church for a while as well. I kind of grew up Christian, but it got quiet in there, and then all of a sudden it was like random people across the whole tent, which was, there was probably a couple thousand people. It was one of those massive tents, just start laughing. Like, random people are laughing at different places, and I'd forgotten about this because at the time I had zero grid for it, and I just thought it was super weird. The friend that I was with thought it was pretty weird too, so we just ended up walking out. But we probably stayed in there for like 20 minutes before we left, and we were just like, what is going on? Like, how? And what was so wild is that nothing was happening from the stage. No one was encouraging or discouraging the laughing. It was just that, like, we got into that moment in the worship, everyone was singing and singing a cappella, and then just silence, and then the laughter just started in different places. And it was whatever. We left, we came back the next day, and the next service was just like all the other ones we'd been to. There wasn't anything weird. But when it came to the message, the preacher did get up and say, like, try to explain what had been happening. But what I realized at the time was that wasn't something that they were usually experiencing. So anyway, that was my first experience with it. I just remember thinking it was so weird and not having any grid for it and just kind of leaving. But looking back, it's so funny because no one was provoking it whatsoever. It was just a spontaneous thing. But backing up a little bit, just sharing my story. Yeah, I grew up kind of in the church, and partially in the same denomination as Zach, at least for some years. And then in like 1999, I encountered Youth with a Mission and ended up like spending time in that mission organization for some years. But I remember, see, in high school, I was like, I was still a good Christian boy, but I got kind of disillusioned because I wondered, what's the point of all this? At least in our denomination, like Zach was saying, I mean, most people weren't experiencing God at all. And if you loved God, the only thing you could do is become a pastor. You know, like normal, I just didn't know any normal people that were really excited about God. And I actually, in my youth group days in high school, I started to get excited about God, but I was like, I don't really want to be a pastor. And there was no other grid for anything like that. I ended up going on a few mission trips. And then I got kind of disillusioned because I was like, nobody's living for God. Like none of the Christian friends I knew were like, they just live like everybody else, and it just seems like so kind of pointless. So I just got, kind of that teenage disillusionment. And then at that point I was just like, who cares, let's get into drugs, partying. I was just down with whatever. I stopped paying attention at school, doing anything at school. And I was just kind of discouraged and disillusioned. And, but thankfully, like my last year of high school, I had some people that were really encouraging me and some experiences that encouraged me to go into Youth with a Mission, into YWAM. But by the time I got there, I was like mostly strung out on drugs. But I say all that because I remember this point when I ended up in New Zealand doing a Youth with a Mission school. And I remember, like, right as I was starting the school, went out to the beach with one of the other students from the school, and he'd been doing drugs for a while too. And we both were kind of talking about drugs and talking about God. And we both kind of just decided that night, we're like, there's got to be a higher high on God than there was in any of the drugs that we did. Like, this is the maker of the universe. Like, there's got to be an experience of reality that's like even more exhilarating and like more like ecstatic than this, the drugs that we'd been doing. And what was so wild is I remember saying that to one another and just contemplating that night. But it wasn't until 7 years later that I met anyone who had been getting high on God. That would say that they were. Maybe there were people I met but I don't know. But there was the first time I really met anybody that was like, it wasn't until 7 years later. All except for that one experience in the Netherlands that I was talking about where people were laughing in there. I guess that's what was going on, but I didn't know about it. But 7 years later, so fast forward 7 years later from my time in YWAM and the beginning of my school, during that school I did get off drugs, hallelujah. And I did start to get into Jesus more and more, started hearing God and learned that you could live with God in everyday life, and met all kinds of radical believers and stuff. But I was just, big into discipline. It was all about like revival and evangelism and a lot of fire and passion, but not a lot of joy, not a lot of exhilaration, not bliss. And it wasn't until 7 years later, so after that YWAM experience, then I'm at this conference. At that point, I'd been in the International House of Prayer, as Zach was talking about, and I'd been in that for a few years. And I'm at this conference, and I meet all these people that are just laughing and falling over. And the conference is a Christian conference, a lot of worship going on. During the worship, they'd always be off to the side, like falling down, literally. Like they'd be like poking each other, and they'd be like, and then they'd fall over, and I'd be like, what is going on, And it annoyed the crap out of me, actually, because I'm like, we're supposed to be focusing on God here and worshiping, and these people are just causing a scene, And but throughout the entire conference, they were, I'd find them everywhere just doing that, just laughing, falling down, like just rolling around, holy rollers or whatever. I didn't know. Found out these guys were from Bethel, Redding, California or whatever, and that was my first experience with Bethel people, really. Maybe I'd heard of it before, but I thought they were so weird. And getting back to kind of Zach's experience, where at first you kind of think it's totally weird and then it becomes totally normal, where I was still in that weird place. And but I forced myself to go near it because I couldn't explain why it bothered me so much. Like, it just bothered the crap out of me for some reason. But even at that moment, I couldn't figure out why. I was like, why does this bother me? Like, why? Okay, I'm gonna go and sit near it. So I went and kind of sat next to them and just watched them for a while. But like, it was like my skin was crawling. Like, I was just irritated and annoyed and like bothered, and I could not put my finger on it. And but that over the next few months, it was like God set me up with all these encounters with these wackos. Part of it that was a great testimony was these wackos were so weird at that meeting, but there was one point where there was this handicapped kid and people started praying over him. He had been in a wheelchair for like some years or whatever, and it was these like weird, like happy people that were praying over him the most, and they ended up pulling him out of the wheelchair and he began to walk and even run. And it was obvious that there was supernatural healing that had just taken place in this kid. And no one else at this conference of like thousands of people who were like more like me, like a little bit normal, you would say, like we're seeing any kind of miracles like that. And so these like weird, happy people were the dudes that were, you know, yanking people out of wheelchairs and seeing like cool healing miracles that I'd never seen before too. So it was like, it came with this weird, like happy bliss thing, but it also had miracles. But anyway, over the next like few weeks, God set me up with these different encounters. Someone shared a John Crowder book with me. I started watching videos with John Crowder and then listening to Benjamin Dunn's music, and then found out about Georgian Banov. I'd been watching Heidi Baker videos and seeing her get trashed. Then my wife, by trashed, you know, I mean high on God. And my wife started to like laugh and kind of manifest a little bit. And then I was weirded out by that. I actually tried to shut my wife down for a while and told her she was just faking it because I couldn't figure this thing out. But then it's like March of 2008. I just remember one night we were house sitting for some friends, and the glory of God just like smacked me so hard. And I was just on the ground just laughing, and it felt like my heart was just open. Before that, I'd been kind of weeping for the previous like couple weeks off and on, just because I felt something, my heart was opening up. And it was just the glory of God, like tangible experiences of the glory of God as my heart began to open up in new ways. Like I just realized that most of us had been kind of shut off emotionally, whether in the church or out of the church. You know, so many people are just, their hearts are locked, and so mine had just kind of been softening and opening up. I was weeping a little bit. And then I was watching a John Crowder 4 Levels of Prayer video. One of the old ones that some girl from the Philippines had posted on YouTube. And my God, dude, I just got slammed. I was laughing. And my wife and I watched that video like every day for the next week. And we started listening to Benjamin Dunn music. And we laughed for days. We laid on the floor for days. It was so beautiful. We'd had a regular prayer time for at least an hour every day together, and as we came together, we would just smile and laugh like we didn't have any other prayers that time. You know, it was so.
And this is before the Kundalini. Spirit, so
yeah,
we know it was real.
This is before any of us knew about Kundalini. You'll get to know Zach's sarcastic humor over the
I hope
podcast.
so, man. Oof.
Either that or you just turn it off. But yeah, those first, few months, that's 2008 was when we were getting whacked. And then some of the message part of it started to kind of creep in too, because at first for me it was just the experience of the joy, and I didn't have any language for, I didn't realize that even theologically God is so much better than we thought. God wasn't looking for workers. God wasn't looking for, because I was, for those 7 years before that, I'd become a very radical believer, I thought it was basically my job to save the world. And I'd become so disciplined. I was scheduling out every hour of my day. I was trying to get all our friends to schedule out every hour of their day and keep each other accountable. So there's nothing wrong with having a schedule, but you should have seen the intensity of, it was, we literally thought by our discipline, literally, that we were going to open the heavens and bring the glory down. Like that it was because there was something we weren't doing right. And man, this whack and this bliss just began to undo all of that. Just as my heart and my emotions began to feel God and feel Him so consistently, it was like, how could, all these old theologies just began to fall away because they just don't make sense with what you're experiencing. And so that was kind of my intro to the bliss. And in the High on God book, I go into more detail about it or whatever, but man, once you taste that, it's like the old phrase, once you go whacked, you never go back, or whatever. And to have your emotions being exhilarated by the life of God, the love of God, the joy of the Lord. It actually is your strength. It actually does change everything. And now it literally is like Zach said, like, why are people not laughing when they're in prayer? Like, it doesn't, now it's so weird to me. In fact, this has kind of been part of the journey of our community, is it's hard for us to go to a lot of normal church services and prayer meetings now, because we're so expressive. We're so like emotionally charged,
Right.
and just experiencing so many things that make you leap and laugh and get excited, and that weirds people out. And so that's a whole nother journey we can talk about too. But you know, it's crazy how God does rewire your brain and really unlock you for your original design, I believe. And so that's been some of our experience. Anything else you want to share this week, man?
Well, yeah, I think should we have people send in questions? There's a
That'd be awesome.
So what I'm going to do is I'm
good.
going to include a link, and you can record an audio of a question, and what we'll do is we'll go through them at some point, and you might be featured on the show. So
Or you can type out your question too.
Yeah, feel free to type out a question too, and we
Either
can
way.
read it out if we choose it. So
Yeah, that'll be a great thing to do over these coming weeks is, we want to interact with you. So get to know you too. If you want to share a little bit of your story, if you have any questions or just comments on this week's show, maybe we'll include that. Yeah, you can record them or you can type them. And all the details are in the links in the description here. Share away. We're going to try to do this on a regular basis. So we'll probably do a little more of introduction. Maybe we'll talk about in the next episode what this bliss really means to us, what it is a little bit more. A lot of this stuff's covered in the book, but it's fun to get into it in person. And I love to just interact with my buddy Zach here.
I'm looking forward to goofing around more.
Exactly. Yeah. So life is good, man. There's so much to celebrate. And so that's what these times will be about, celebrating together with you and experiencing this bliss. So hopefully you got to get to know us a little bit better this week. And we look forward to getting to know y'all. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Share away, and we'll catch you later.
Catch you later.
Peace. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the High on God podcast with Matthew Spinks and Zachary Paul Pratt. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and check out the accompanying YouTube vlog where we'll have short guided meditations on the glory of Jesus, as well as additional random coverage and updates from the God High. Also, if you believe in the message we're putting out to the world, consider donating or becoming a monthly partner at www.thefirehouseprojects.com/donate so that we can spread the authentic, inebriating good news of Jesus. Alrighty then, until next time, stay high on the supply inside that never runs dry, Jesus Christ.